It's late, the house is quiet, and you're staring at a glowing screen. You just spent 20 minutes answering questions about how you'd react to a party or a rainy day. And then it happens. The screen flashes and it gives you a four-letter label or a personality type. Suddenly, you feel seen. It's like someone finally put a name to the chaos inside your head. You share it with a friend thinking, this is exactly who I am. But have you ever stopped to wonder how a bunch of multiple choice questions can claim to know your soul? Because behind those colorful badges and social media quizzes, there is a cold, hard world of mathematics. It's a field called psychometrics, and it's the bridge between the messy reality of being human and the precision of data. Today, we're going to look at the math of identity, and we're going to find out if you're actually being measured or just being sold a reflection.
At its core, psychometrics is the science of measuring the unmeasurable. In physics, if you want to know how tall you are, you use a ruler. But how do you measure extroversion or emotional stability? You can't touch them and you can't put them on a scale. Psychometricians call these latent constructs. They're invisible traits that we believe exist inside of you. Since we can't see the trait itself, we look for its shadow. We ask questions like, do you start conversations with strangers? If you say yes, that is a data point, a ripple in the water that points to the fish underneath. Psychometrics turns these ripples into a numerical score. It uses measurement theory to ensure that the ruler we are using isn't broken. It asks, is this test actually measuring personality, or is it just measuring how you feel today? When you take a real psychological assessment, you aren't just answering questions. You are participating in a mathematical model designed to map the geography of your mind. It's the process of taking the vibes of your personality and turning them into a coordinate.
Think back to the last time you read a personality description that felt spookily accurate. Maybe it said, you have a great deal of unused capacity which you have not turned to your advantage. Or, while you have some personality weaknesses, you are generally able to compensate for them. When you read those words, your brain lights up. That's me, you think. How did they know? But here's the cold truth. That description was written to fit almost everyone on Earth. In psychology, we call this the Barnum Effect, or the Forer effect. It's the reason why horoscopes and low-quality internet quizzes feel so personal. We have a natural tendency to take vague, general statements and fill in the blanks with our own lives. We want to be understood so badly that we become co-authors of the lie. I remember taking a quiz in college that told me I was a sensitive visionary. I carried that label around like a shield for weeks. But when I actually looked at the data, I realized the test was just a mirror reflecting my own ego. It wasn't measuring me, it was just flattering me. And in the world of real science, flattery is the enemy of the truth.
In the world of science, we don't care if a test feels good. We care if it's robust. To separate a Facebook quiz from a clinical assessment, we use two metrics, validity and reliability. Think of it like a dartboard. Reliability is about consistency. If you take the test today and then next Tuesday, do you get the same result? If a test tells you that you're an introvert on Monday and an extrovert on Friday, it's not a test. It's a mood ring. Validity, on the other hand, is about accuracy. Does the test actually measure what it says it's measuring? If I give you a math test and claim it measures your creativity, that test has zero validity. A valid personality test has to correlate with real-world behavior. For example, if you score high on conscientiousness, you should statistically be more likely to show up to work on time. If the math doesn't predict the behavior, the math is wrong. Psychometricians spend years norming these tests against thousands of people. They calculate the standard error of measurement to see how much noise is in the signal. Because in the math of identity, if the ruler changes length every time you use it, You aren't measuring anything at all.
In the late 1800s, a man named Francis Galton became obsessed with a single idea. He believed that if something existed, it could and should be measured. He didn't just want to measure height or weight, he wanted to measure the human mind. Galton would set up anthropometric laboratories at exhibitions in London. People would pay a small fee to have their reaction times tested and their heads measured. He was looking for the average man, trying to find the mathematical center of humanity. Imagine walking into a room filled with brass instruments and ticking clocks. You're sitting there clicking buttons and identifying colors, while a man in a suit scribbles numbers. Galton was one of the first to realize that human traits follow a pattern. He saw that if you measure enough people, a shape starts to emerge from the chaos. He paved the way for the mental test, the ancestor of every quiz you've ever taken. But Galton's quest was also a cautionary tale about how we use data. Because when you turn a person into a number, it's easy to forget the person behind it. He was the pioneer of the tools we use today, but he also showed us the weight of that power.
If you ask 10 psychologists what the best personality test is, 9 will say the Big Five. It's not based on a theory or a dream. It's based on the English language. Researchers looked at every word we use to describe people, thousands of them. Then they used a statistical technique to see which words clumped together. They found 5 distinct buckets that almost every human trait falls into. We use the acronym OCEAN to remember them. Openness to experience. Are you a curious explorer or a fan of the familiar? Conscientiousness. Are you organized and reliable, or do you thrive in chaos? Extroversion. Do you get your energy from a crowd or from solitude? Agreeableness. Are you naturally trusting, or are you more skeptical and competitive? Neuroticism. How sensitive are you to stress and negative emotions? Unlike the MBTI, which puts you in a type, the Big Five measures you on a sliding scale. You aren't an introvert or an extrovert. You are at the 30th percentile of extroversion. This is the math of personality. It's not a label, it's a coordinate on 5 different maps.
So, how did scientists narrow down thousands of personality traits into just 5? They used a mathematical powerhouse called factor analysis. Imagine you have a giant list of traits: talkative, sociable, energetic, and assertive. When researchers look at the data, they notice something interesting. People who rate themselves high on talkative almost always rate themselves high on sociable. Mathematically, these words are moving together. They are highly correlated. Factor analysis is the statistical shovel that digs beneath these surface-level words. It looks for the common factor that explains why all those traits are hanging out together. In this case, the hidden factor is extroversion. It's like looking at a shadow on the wall and realizing it's being cast by a single object. By using this math, psychologists stopped guessing what personality was. They let the data tell them how human nature is structured. It's the reason why the Big Five is so respected in the scientific community. It wasn't invented by a philosopher in an armchair. It was discovered in the numbers. Deep down, we all want to know which box we fit into. Are you a Gryffindor, an INTJ, a Type A personality? There is a strange comfort in these labels. It makes the world feel organized. But have you ever felt like a label was suffocating you? Like you were being compressed into a 4-letter code that didn't allow for your bad days? The truth is, humans don't actually live in boxes. We live on spectrums. Think of a dimmer switch on a wall. You aren't just on or off when it comes to being social or being anxious. You're somewhere in the middle, adjusted by the light of the room you're in. When a test forces you into a category, it's often ignoring the math to give you a better story. It's easier to say, I am an introvert, than to say, I am at the 24th percentile of extroversion. But the labels we love are often the least scientific things about us. Real psychometrics doesn't want to put you in a box. It wants to show you the vast, open field of who you actually are.
If you take a test and get a score of 75, what does that actually mean? Without a context, it means absolutely nothing. In psychometrics, your score only has power when it's compared to everyone else. This is called standardization. Imagine a giant symmetrical hill. This is the normal distribution, or the bell curve. Most people, about 68% of the population, sit right in the middle of that hill. They aren't extremely shy, but they aren't the life of every single party either. As you move toward the edges, the tails of the curve, the numbers get smaller. These are the outliers, the people who are exceptionally organized or incredibly spontaneous. When a psychologist looks at your results, they are looking at where you sit on that curve. Are you normal, or are you 3 standard deviations away from the average? This math allows us to see how unique a trait really is. It's the difference between saying, "I'm tall," and saying, "I'm taller than 95% of people." The bell curve is the map that tells us where you fit in the human story.
Now, imagine you're applying for your dream job. You've spent years studying, building your resume, and preparing for the interview. But before you even meet a human being, you're asked to take a personality assessment. Behind the scenes, an algorithm is crunching your answers into a single score. It's deciding if you're resilient enough for the stress or agreeable enough for the team. In that moment, the math of identity stops being a curiosity and starts being a gatekeeper. We use these tools to decide who gets hired, who gets promoted, and even who we should date. Algorithms on dating apps are essentially psychometric matchmakers. They try to predict compatibility by looking at the correlations between your traits and someone else's. It's a powerful tool, but it's also a heavy responsibility. Because when we rely too much on the numbers, we risk turning people into data points. I've seen people lose out on opportunities because a test said they weren't dominant enough. But a test can't see the context of your life or the effort you put into growing. It's a snapshot of a moment, not a prophecy of your future. We have to remember that while the math is real, it's not the whole story.
At the end of the day, psychometrics is a tool, not a crystal ball. It gives us a language to talk about why we do what we do. It maps the big 5 traits and shows us where we sit on the bell curve of humanity. But even with the most advanced factor analysis, there is a residual variance. In math, that's the part of the equation that remains unexplained. It's the 10% or 20% of your behavior that doesn't fit the model. That's the part of you that chooses to be brave when you're naturally anxious. It's the part that stays organized for a project even when you're naturally messy. Psychometrics can measure your tendencies, but it cannot measure your will. It can tell us how you are likely to act, but it can't tell us who you will choose to become. The math of identity is a map of the forest, but you are the one walking the path. So take the tests, look at the data, and learn from the patterns. But never forget that the most important parts of you are the ones that can't be turned into a number.